Hi there again. My name is Patrick Tissigem. I'm a managing partner at UTU, a company based in Brussels, Belgium. And in this session here, I'm going to talk and illustrate how you can work with managed properties in the advanced search page of a search center in your collaboration portals that are delivered with the Microsoft Office SharePoint Server 2007. SharePoint designers are typically going to add custom metadata to containers that store content and documents in a SharePoint site. For example, I have here a theme site called MSDN with on it two libraries. One is called Project Report 1, and it has an extra column called Project Ref Number, and a second one is called Project Reports 2 with an extra column also, but this time it is called Project Reference Number. Within the two libraries, we store the same information, the identification of the project. But in the first document library, the administrator has named it in a slightly different way than in the second document library. Now, this is a real-world situation where many administrators are working within the server farm, and sometimes consistency in the naming is hard to find. Custom metadata in SharePoint is going to be crawled by the index engine, and what we can do is we can expose these metadata in the advanced search page here in the search center. So here we can populate the property picker with extra metadata so that the users can create more complex queries here in the search center. Now, this is not going to happen automatically. I need to perform a couple of steps. A first step is, of course, making sure that our content is going to be crawled. So here in the administration side of my shared service provider, I can go to Search Settings, and I have already defined a content source called Local Office SharePoint Server Site that is pointing to my msdn.litwareinc.com, and I have done a full crawl so that the index file is ready. And during the crawling, all of the metadata, the custom metadata, has been collected. There is a page where you can review all of the properties that have been crawled. So if I go back to the search settings and I click here on metadata property mappings, I will end up in a page where I first see all of the managed properties. Now I'm going to explain these in a moment. But over here in the quick launch, you also have a link to the crawled properties page. And crawled properties are categorized. You can have many properties that have been collected. And if I go to the category SharePoint and I do a search on project, I will get to see the two columns that have been defined at the level of the document libraries in my MSDN theme site. But remember that the administrators in the collaboration site were not that consistent in the naming. So we have a project ref number and we have a project reference number. If we want to expose these metadata in the advanced search page, what we want is we want to kind of expose this as one property. And that is the whole goal of something new in SharePoint Server 2007, and that is the concept of managed properties. So a managed property is really there to help you exposing different crawl properties that basically have the same meaning in a very consistent, unified way to the user in the search page. Many managed properties already exist, as you can see here, but it's fairly easy to create your own managed property. Just give it a name. No spaces are allowed here. You can give a description. You define what type of information is going to be stored within your property. I'm going to stick with the text type. And then we are going to add the mappings. So we end up here in a dialog where we can use our search for project again. And one by one, we're going to add the two columns that we want to associate with our new managed property. So I'll go for the second one, the project reference number. And then the final thing you can do is check this option here to allow the property to be used in scopes. When you define a shared search scope, you can start creating rules that are of type property query. And when you check this option here, you will be able to use your managed property project code as a possible criteria in the creation of these types of rules. But I'm going to simply press OK, and this will conclude the creation of the managed property. We can verify here in our list that we have over here that we have a new managed property called project code, which is mapped to the project ref number and the project reference number. So when we want to expose our property, we're going to expose project code and not the two individual crawl properties. Now let me illustrate the different steps you have to take as an administrator to expose this managed property in the advanced search page. Do know that this is not done automatically, and there are a number of steps involved. The first step is make sure that your advanced search page is in edit mode. And then you have this advanced search box, which is the web part that you can configure using the modify shared web part option here. There are many attributes, many properties that you can configure, but for the purpose of our demo here, I'm going to go to the properties category, where you have the option to enable the display of the properties or disable it. We have a label that we can set. More important is here the properties text box that contains some XML that we need to configure in order for the new managed property to be visualized in the property picker. Now this is not the most friendliest environment to make changes to the XML, so what I'm going to do is just copy this into Visual Studio. And let's have a look at this XML. It is consisting out of a number of blocks. The first one is the lang defs, so the language definitions that can be visualized in the language picker. But important for us here is the property def elements. So if we want to have our newly created managed property visualized in the property picker, we need to add an extra property def element. Let's give it a name, project code. The data type is okay. And we also have a display name that we are going to set. And here we are going to use project code with a space. Now, there are many possible result types that can be selected by the user in the advanced search box. And what you need to do is, if you want to visualize your managed property in one of the result types, you have to add it to this list here. So I'm going to just have my project code managed property visualized when people are selecting all results in the result type picker. Let me change this to project code. But you can also complete this further and visualize your managed property when people are selecting documents in the result type picker, Word documents, Excel documents, and so on. But this is okay for me, so I'm going to just copy this again, and I'll drop it here in the dialog, replacing what we had before. And when I press OK now, I'm going to be able, as a user, if I publish the page, I'm going to be able to, as a user, to go here in the pick property and select my project code, and then start using that managed property in my search query. So these were the steps to kind of create a managed property and expose it here in the advanced search page. The Microsoft Office SharePoint Server 2007 comes with a full-blown search administration object model. So you as a developer, you can create also managed properties, for example, in a programmatic way. I have here a Windows application where I have already set the necessary references to allow us to communicate with this API. So I have a reference to the Microsoft.office.server.dll, the Microsoft.office.server.search.dll, and also the Microsoft.SharePoint.dll and the System.web.dll are necessary. So let's have a look at the code here. And the first thing you will see in the code editor is the list of namespaces that we are going to use. And then our application doesn't run in the context of SharePoint, so the first thing we need to do is make sure we have a reference to the context of our shared service provider. We do this by calling the getContext method at the level of the server context class. And since we are going to communicate with the search engine, we also need the context of the search. And again, you call the getContext method, but now at the level of the search context class. And you provide it with the server context instance. The application is going to display all of the managed properties in a tree view. Now, to accomplish this, the first thing you need to do is create an instance of the schema class. This is your entry point for the things you want to do here. You provide it with the search context, and then at the level of this instance, you have a property called all managed properties. This gives you access to the collection of managed properties. You can make use of a loop and one by one add the managed properties to the tree view. And also you can go and grab the different crawl properties that are associated with it. So there's a method called getMappings, which gives you back a mapping collection, and this mapping collection can be used to loop over all of the crawl properties. And one by one we can add them as subnotice. The application is also going to display a list box populated with the crawl properties. Now do know that there can be many properties that have been crawled by the index engine, so you might want to filter and you might want to kind of limit the amount of properties you're going to display in your application. There is a method called query crawled properties that you can use for this. It accepts, for example, a filter and also a maximum amount of properties that you want to get retrieved. Creating a property, a managed property, is fairly simple. Just make sure you have an instance of the schema class, and then you call the create methods on the all managed properties. So the managed property collection exposes the create method. You only have to provide the name of the managed property and then the type. Now, creating the managed property is only one step. You also have to add the mappings to the crawl properties. First thing you need to do, of course, is make sure you have an instance of your managed property, and then you create an instance of the mapping collection. This mapping collection is going to be populated with all of the crawl properties. So one by one, you can add the crawl properties using an instance of the mapping class. You just provide a number of values as parameters, and things you have to provide are the ID, the grid of your crawl property, the name of it, the variant type, and also the ID of the managed property itself. Once the mapping collection has been populated, you just call the set mappings, provided with that instance of the mapping collection, and you have associated the crawl properties to your managed property. Let's run the application. The first thing that the application does is connecting to the shared service provider. So show me the message box. And then we can refresh the tree view so that we get to see all of the managed properties. And we should find here the project code managed property that we have created earlier. And you see here that it has been mapped to the two crawl properties. I can create a new property. For example, I can create a project ID. Let's create the property. And over here, we will find the managed property in the tree view. I can link it to, for example, the two properties that we have crawled over here. So those two, I'll make sure I select this one, and then click the map properties, and we have kind of mapped the crawl properties to our managed property. So programmatically, you can perform all of these steps that you have done in the browser. This concludes what I had to show you about managed properties. I showed you how to create managed properties in the browser using the administration pages. I also showed you how to expose it in the advanced search page. And to conclude, I showed you a bit of code demonstrating that you can perform all of the steps also using either C# or VB.NET.